feedback. As far as the assignment goes, we're going to leave that up to the very end so that the people who just have time to listen to the lecture will get a chance to get the information they need. And after that, those of you who want to stick around and practice the things that we talked about, you're more than welcome to. Okay, so I think that's all I need to do on my presentation. Do we typically wait a few minutes before people show up, or like?
Yeah. I would wait because a lot of people join 5 minutes later or 10 minutes later.
Yeah, cool. All right. Well, I guess in the meantime, I can introduce myself a little bit. My name is Gordon. I had a pretty long educational history, actually. I'll start there. I attended FCD, and when that turned out it wasn't so good, I went to Art Center as well. I studied in the entertainment design department for concept art for about a year and a half to 2 years before I dropped out and started working in a studio. I started off with mobile games, and I eventually worked my way up into touching some AAA projects before I sort of decided, hey, the career path here is really long. It's really harsh. The money isn't fantastic. I'm going to go do computer science. At which point, pulled back in, and I taught at the university, the Academy of Art University, for about 2 years. The classes I taught primarily were architecture for concept art, a class called environment sketching, but it was an architecture class. And we also did a hard surface design class. You know what? I think it may be better if I got my camera on and shared my screen. Hey, this is what it looked like. Okay, so we'll take a few minutes to wait for people to show up, and then after that, I'll just get ready. Start my presentation. I'm expecting a lot of this stuff to be stuff that you have heard before, right? But I wanted to present an introduction to design in a clear and organized manner. I'm not sure if I do the best job at it, but you take what you can get, I guess. On your part, you have no choice. Haha. But it is pretty interesting because, as far as I know, not a lot of schools teach strict design. There's Art Center. There's you could probably say Brainstorm. CDA claims to, but I haven't really seen the evidence of it too much. And CGMA as well. Those classes tend to those schools in general tend to teach more traditional fundamentals, things like perspective, rendering, and a lot of their design comes from take some reference from the internet, copy the reference, copy a few different references, put them together, and there's your design, right? And while that is a good process, and that is certainly something that you want to be doing, it is not. It doesn't go deep into the roots of what design is. And what I want to present here is that today, right? So to give a brief history, while we keep waiting for people to show up, I won't talk about anything important. I'll just kind of go on my own rant. Get some beer. So to go back to it, though, right? Industrial design in its modern incarnation, we can say, went back to probably around. Well, it's been around forever. But if you'd want to talk about like our modern understanding of design, we're going to go back to about like the late 19th century, mid to late 19th century, early 20th century, when a lot of people were starting to really think hard about what they should about design, right? Before that, we mostly, it's like we relied on the classics. We copied the Greeks, we copied the Romans, and we copied nature, right? It was that way for a long time. There were definitely movements within architecture, within manufacturing, industrial design during that time, right? Mostly through the efforts of craftsmen, but the fields moved very slowly. If you think about how like Gothic architecture developed and eventually like slowly evolved into Baroque architecture or Rococo architecture, it's essentially like copy pasting, right? Photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy. until we move from one way to another. Kind of like how animals might evolve slowly, deliberately, piece by piece. And when the Industrial Revolution really took off, that changed, right? For one, a lot of artists found themselves out of work because now we have photography, so your fundamentals don't count for shit anymore. And instead, you have to find a way to express yourself that in a way that a camera can't capture, right? So you see the beginning of the Impressionists, and from there, once those floodgates were opened and people were kind of allowed to do whatever the hell they wanted, the design became a major consideration as well, right? So we can trace our roots back today as concept artists or concept designers, probably to around there, to around the point where you're looking at Art Nouveau, Art Deco, and later on the modernists and postmodernists, right? People like Alphonse Mucha were very interested in design. Of course, there were like many people who were interested in design before. You look at like Da Vinci or something, right? Doing concept art on his like tanks and flying machines and such. But those were all mostly grounded in functionality, and the design that we're talking about today, it is to do with functionality, but it is we're not building anything that we draw in real life. When you draw a tank for a video game studio, you're not exactly expecting that to be actually any good in combat. You just want to look cool and imposing and that sort of thing, right? Okay, so I've ranted for about 7 minutes now, and I feel pretty comfortable getting started. We'll be talking about quite a few principles in rather rapid succession. So if you guys want to take notes, or if you guys want to record, now would be a good time to fire that up, right? Okay, let's get down to my screen share. Let's see here. So here we go. That should be reading properly. I just have a few slides prepared. And it's not too much, but I'll be talking in depth, and I'll be doing a quick demonstration to apply some of the principles that we're discussing here. Okay, so I'm going to start with a broad concept and a broad sort of field that I think that you guys should be acquainted with, called Gestalt psychology. Right. So this was a turn of the century field of study, and you might recognize some of the images in here. They kind of they're quite famous, right? But the real idea that I want you guys to latch onto from this field of study is just this, right? That the context of what you draw matters more than the content, right? That the big picture is far more important than any singular detail, and that's true when you design, right? When we design, we want to be thinking of the big picture first and foremost. We want to be thinking of themes, motifs, right? Shape language, all of these big important things. Because as we can see, right, the big picture in images like this holds precedence over any single detail, right? If we were a robot, I guess not anymore because AI has come so far. But if we were a robot like 20 years ago, we might be able to see these details, right, one by one, and we'd be able to see like, okay, this circle has like a couple wedges in it. This circle has a couple different wedges in it. But we'd have a hard time seeing the cube that's hidden underneath, right? However, humans are pattern-seeking animals. We specifically search that stuff out. So when you look at these examples, right? For example, there's an implied sphere over here, right? Your perception here matters. So just in general, right? Gestalt psychology, remember that your parts are part of a whole, and that the whole is different than the sum of its parts, right? I'm not going to say it's more than the sum of its parts. I'm not going to say it's less than the sum of its parts. It's just a different beast altogether, right? It is shifted. Okay, so if you guys do want to research more about like the specific principles at work here, I guess it's going to be more productive than playing like League of Legends or jacking off, guys. I would recommend it. There's a book called Art and Visual Perception. Oops. Right, by a guy named Rudolf Arnheim. That's if you want to get really deep. for those of you who want to be like concept designers and you're incredibly serious about it, you're not like, I'm not an illustrator, I'm not a comic book guy, I'm not like one of these Twitter artists. I'm not like some Coomer who just wants to draw furry porn. Like, I recommend this book, right? But my recommendation comes with a big sort of asterisk, and that is this guy, right? His name's Rudolf Arnheim, right? Which means he's German, which means he's a fucking sadist, right? And the way that he writes his book is extremely dry and extremely painful to read. If you can make it through, I mean, take it one step at a time. No need to like, get through it all in 1 week or anything. But it is a difficult read. He tends to over-explain simple concepts, but there are some gems in there as well. Okay, so let's get down to it, right? What I'm going to start with is this idea of repetition and pattern, right? Let's say that you're like a caveman or something, and you wake up and you go outside out of your cave, and let's say that you see one of three things, right? We have case A, case B, and case C, right? Case A presents pure repetition and pure pattern, right? In this case, this is a pure expression of what we call shape language, right? It's just a bunch of S-curves kind of stacked on top of each other. In case A, you probably don't care very much, right? This is very uninteresting. Nothing seems out of place. It feels whole, right? But nothing catches your gaze and nothing catches your interest as well. I'm going to jump ahead to case C, right? If you walk out of your cave and you see case C outside your door, you're probably wondering about what you ate last night. You probably don't know what the hell is going on, and it becomes almost incomprehensible, right? This is too chaotic. Because there is no consistent shape language here, I mean, like, I know, I copy-pasted, right? But you guys get the idea. It becomes unreadable, right? And it becomes very confusing. Sometimes in your designs, you want boring. Other times in your designs, you want confusing, right? It's all context, once again. If your art director comes up and says like, there's a sequence in which this character, gets clobbered on the head and they can't make sense of anything for a while, something like this might make sense, right? There's a sequence when we want the player to feel bored for whatever reason, something like this might make sense, right? Typically, you're going to be somewhere in between, in a sweet spot, right? This, if you see this, right? If you're Mr. Caveman or Miss Caveman, we're accepting of all genders here, and you see something like this, right, outside your door, it grabs your attention, right? Because now we have a pattern and we have a breakage of the pattern, right? Once again, human beings are pattern-perceiving animals, right? So if we break a pattern, we suddenly become very interested, right? Something is there that isn't supposed to be. Right? This is a pretty. I think this is a pretty straightforward concept to understand. If you guys do have any questions, I should probably keep an eye on the workshop text, shouldn't I? Right. Okay. Oh, hey Wes, how you doing, man? The Industrial Revolution, its consequences have been a disaster for a human race. Yeah, you get it. Yeah, more or less. Oh man, if only Uncle Ted could see me now. Okay. Right. So, in terms of principle, this is pretty simple to understand. How do we actually apply this to our own designs, right? Well, as designers, what we're mostly doing is we're playing with shapes and we're playing with form, right? There's a third thing that we play with a lot, but I'm actually going to introduce that now. The third thing that we play with is contrast, right? And pattern breaking, which is what we're talking about here, right? So here's a design that I made that is pretty much on the boring side. Nothing seems out of place. It seems okay, right? It is a little bit dry. There's no particular reason to pay attention to this. And if I told you guys to consider to continue the pattern, you would probably be able to do it, right? Unless you had some kind of mental deficiency, drawing this pattern out one by one shouldn't be too difficult for anybody with like an IQ over 80, right? On the other hand, we have this, right? This time it's a little bit different, you know? This one we kind of got squares. This one we don't really know what shape we're going to draw next, right? If you told me to continue the pattern from here, you know, I wouldn't know. Maybe it's like a little star shape, right? We got Patrick in here. Maybe it's a little swirly, right? No clue. Once again, this becomes very chaotic, right? In the middle, there's a sweet spot, right? In the middle, we still have more or less the same shape design, right? Yeah, yeah. This is actually the exact energy we're talking here, right? Things don't quite fit together, right? In the middle, we're going to have shapes repeating themselves, but we're going to break that shape up. So there is an element of a pattern here in that we are using kind of these like trapezoid shapes, I guess, right? But we are finding contrast in them as well, right? One of the big ones is going to be just size contrast. We have a big one, we have a size one, and we have a small one, right? But there's other things as well that you might not be super keen on right away. There is, of course, the contrast of these are supposed to be squares, but I kind of made them into, I kind of made one side longer, one side shorter, right? That generates a little bit of contrast. They're represented at different elevations, which adds a little bit of contrast as well. In fact, if you think about the elevation, even the elevation has contrast, right? I have one low, I have one here, and I have one here. There's contrast between the size of the gaps, right? We're not evenly spacing anything out. That makes things interesting. You know, we can still more or less understand it. We still group them all as one object, right? But there's something interesting about it now. Okay, let's move on. This is applicable in 3D as well, right? These are a few that I did right before. I think I did these yesterday actually. And these are just exercises in pure design. They're not supposed to be representational of anything. You might be wondering, hey, Gordon, you know, I want to design trucks, or I want to design characters, or I want to design guns, or I want to design spaceships, right? When are you going to show me how to design guns and spaceships and characters and boats and planes? We'll get around to that, right? For now, these are just pure designs. In each one of these, there's a potential to become whatever you like, right? But, you know, before we worry about making a good truck or we worry about making a good gun, let's simply worry about making a good, interesting arrangement of shapes, right? It's one of those questions where it's like, how can you design a gun or how can you design a character if you can't even design a couple of squares put together, right? You're gonna have a really, really hard time with that. So I'll do one of these quickly as a demo for you. I'm just gonna pick one shape. Let's say that I pick like an S curve that gets extruded in 3D. So I'm gonna have like my perspective over here. To do the demos or to do the in-class assignments that I planned out for you guys, you don't really need to be able to draw in perspective, but it does help, right? Especially if you want to, you know, if you're doing concept art, there's like no reason for you to not learn perspective. Just do it. So maybe I got like my wedge shape over here. Maybe I'll flatten the side out. It's not quite an S curve. Let's go ahead and make a design of this. Perspective not quite right. Yep. So I'm going to start with a big one. I might go ahead and make this side a little bit smaller, just to add like a little bit of contrast to it. For this piece down here, I could make just like a flat line, or I can introduce this curve back in, right? So it's like a C curve with like a cut, maybe like this, not like that, maybe the other way. Nah, you know what? I kind of like just keeping it flat actually. I need to overcomplicate it, right? So that's going to be piece number one. Let's go ahead and add another one. Right? Maybe this time I'll cut it in this way. And maybe I can even have it come out. You know what? This just feels like it's in perspective now. I'm not even going to have one beside be smaller. Let's just keep this simple. I don't want to like overburden myself when I'm giving a demo. If you guys are ever drawing in front of a crowd and you mess up, it's like the worst feeling in the world. You feel like you want to die. Okay, so there we go. Let's make this side the fat side. in there. And let's start erasing some of these lines. So over here, see what's going on. Looks like the side should be over here. Let's draw this back to perspective and erase these extra guidelines that don't need. So there's a couple of shapes put together. Let's find just one more of these. And this time, let's go ahead and do a really tiny one, right? I'll keep this simple. Don't want to do any of these like cut-ins anymore. There we go. So this is the start of a shape. I can rotate it, I can flip it around, I can look at it from many different angles, and it can become many different things, right? Over here, if I want to, I can probably make it into like a spaceship or a truck or some kind of weapon, oriented this way. Maybe like if I orient it this way, then it would be like that first person view, right? Where you have like the barrel over here, and you got like here. And it could probably quite easily become some kind of architecture as well, right? But what's important right now is that it has like a cohesive shape language, and it makes sense in perspective, it makes sense in 3D, and it's got a little bit of contrast to it, right? This one big, one medium, one small thing, frankly, I wouldn't worry too much about like keeping to it. It's kind of like what you do to students to force them to think about contrast, but you don't have to stick to it. If you want to do like one big shape, a couple of medium shapes, and like 10 different small shapes, that's totally within your power to, right? It's not generally good to worry too much about the rules. There's a little bit of general sort of life advice, or art advice rather, that I want to give you guys as well. And that is that when you have a system that's defined by rules, right? What it generally means is that you can think of these things as like tools almost, right? Where it's like you learn perspective. Perspective has a very well defined, and it's governed by a very clear rule set. It's a tool, right? It's a tool. It's good to have the tool, right? It's good to if you have a hammer, it beats not having a hammer. If you're trying to build something, if you have a saw, it beats not having a saw. Sure, right? But just having the tools by themselves doesn't mean that you'll make anything interesting, right? Having a hammer, all that means is you can drive nails. If you have a saw, that all that means is you can cut a piece of lumber in half, right? It doesn't exactly mean that you can make anything interesting out of it, right? And that should be the ultimate goal. Sure, it's good to take time to learn how to use your hammer, learn how to use your saw, but the journey doesn't stop there, right? In fact, that's like the very first thing. Right? If you talk to like any craftsman or any like woodworker, and you tell them like, hey, is it just about like learning the tools? Probably going to be like, okay, no, there's some kind of creativity has to go into it as well. And on top of that, just because you have a tool doesn't mean you have to use it either. So, for example, in this case, I'm showing you guys a little bit on shape design, and I'm showing you specifically like a little bit of a big, medium, small. In this specific case, I'm showing you guys a little bit of the big, medium, small. Right? You don't always have to use it. In fact, if you have a hammer and you go around looking for nails to hammer down, it isn't necessarily going to mean that you're going to create anything interesting, right? Instead, the way I like to think about your fundamentals is that they are, once again, they're tools, and there's an appropriate time to use them when you need to, drive an idea home, or you need to exaggerate something, or show something, or express something. But you shouldn't actively go out looking for opportunities to use them, right? That would be a mistake. Okay, so let's go ahead and actually, just to show that, I'm going to go ahead and draw this shape a few more times, right? Always be sure to give yourself the freedom to work the way you want and to create what you think is interesting and cool. Even if the rules say otherwise, it's whatever, right? The rules are there to help you. If you ever feel like you're not allowed to do something, then fuck it, right? That's not the rules there to do. It's not there to stop you from doing things. It's there to help you make what you want. I would try it out anyways, and then if it doesn't work, maybe you can go back to the rules, right? But if it happens to work, then it's cool, right? As long as it looks good, as long as it's the result you're looking for, it's okay. Maybe you didn't have to use the hammer this time. All right, cool. So that's essentially that. We're working with a similar shape, right? And we're adding a little bit of contrast. In this case, it's size contrast, it's shape contrast. Here are a few other shapes I made, right? Just this one's just with like a half pipe. These are made with cylinders. This is made with like, I don't know what this is, like some kind of bell curve, right? Yeah, bell curve. I'm here, right? You're here. Kidding. But you can see that they're all loosely following the rule of big, medium, and small, where they all kind of have like, big one, small one, but they don't follow precisely, right? It's not like you need one big, you need one medium, you need one small. Anytime you have an art teacher or somebody saying that you need to do something a certain way, they tell them to go fuck themselves because that's just not true, right? Things will get extremely boring if everybody did the exact same thing the exact same way, right? And at that point, anybody doing anything different would be like a breath of fresh air for people, right? The whole point of making art is that we want to show somebody, we want to show people perhaps something, unique that they haven't seen before. Once it becomes pedestrian, it's like how people complain about modern art, where it's like, oh, like Andy Warhol, it's so easy to be Andy Warhol. He just like makes his prints. Yeah, but before Andy Warhol, nobody did that, right? And now, if you try to copy him, you're just a hack. You're just a rip-off artist, right? Because he did something that was fresh and interesting, and you're just copying him, right? It's not about how much effort you're putting in; it's about like the quality of your ideas in that case. We're going to take these designs farther later on as part of the demo, but for now, let's put them aside because there's something else that I want to quickly touch on. Oh my goodness, are we going to go for half an hour already? Doesn't feel like that to me. All right, whatever. Let's just talk about key shape really quick, right? So one thing that you notice is that I picked up a few different cars up, and they all have different shape languages, right? So for example, this Cybertruck, right, the Elon Musk car, it has a different shape. We're using big, chamfered, planes with like these cut lines, and it's like kind of like a low poly model almost, right? And that has its own shape language, right? Big, planes, low poly. And this thing kind of has its own shape language as well, where it's almost like one of these, I don't know, like a rounded off box, right? Something like this. We see this shape over and over again. It's like that. Excuse me. Right? Everything here, this one kind of has like its own thing going on, right? Where we have this, smooth surfaced, but also like start with like precise geometrically measured shapes. Over here, we're using a lot more triangles and aggressive shapes, right? Over here, we're back to like boxes, but with like a little bit of rounding out. And then here, it's very square, right? However, there is one thing that is consistent between all of these cars, right? And those are the wheels are always round, okay? The wheels are pretty much always round, right? There is a good reason that the wheels are round, right? If you can't think of why the wheels have to be round, you might be mentally challenged, right? You should probably realize why the wheels have to be round. And this is a very important thing to consider, right? Because while we were here, while we were doing shapes like this, we don't even know what we're making. We don't know what kind of functionality it has. But there are hard limits in reality to what we can do, right? No matter how good of a designer you are, you cannot transcend the laws of physics and you cannot make square wheels, right? I mean, you can, but nobody's going to want it, right? And that's what a key shape is, right? At least, these terms get like mixed up and thrown around differently. So maybe like my definition of key shape is different from other people's that you've heard. But what I'm talking about are these like functional shapes, right? And there are certain shapes that if you use them, will instantly make something or make your design read as something, right? For example, if you have, I don't care like what kind of shape language you have, if you put like a barrel and a handle and a trigger and a stock on your design, on whatever shape you want, it's going to look like a gun. If you put 4 circles on the underside of your design, it's going to look like some kind of vehicle or cart, right? One of the easiest examples I have is think about what the key shapes of a bird are, right? If something needs to read as a bird, it probably needs like two eyes, it probably needs a beak, right? It probably needs some kind of a wing, right? And it probably needs like maybe a tail, right? So this by itself already reads as a bird, even though I have like nothing finished, right? And if I want to draw like a triangle here, it's going to look like a bird, right? And if I want to draw a circle here, it's still going to look like a bird. Even if I draw like the unlikely shape of a square, right, it's still going to look like a bird, right? Because the key shapes are all in place. It's important to know when you're designing things to realize what the key shapes of what you're designing are, right? Some people come to me and they try to be original. They say, Gordon, this is my design right here for a gun, right? And I will tell them, that doesn't look like a gun. Can you explain? And they're like, oh, yeah, I've separated myself. I've risen above the crowd. Everybody else draws guns with the same barrel and trigger and handle and stock, right? But what I've done is I've drawn a gun that nobody has ever seen before, right? Some of you might be having the same problem, right? You might have this weird compulsion towards originality when it's needlessly original, right? I would watch that, right? I would watch that because ultimately, when we draw and when we design, we're trying to communicate with with the people who are consuming our designs, right? If they don't understand it, or if we don't give them like a way to understand it, then you have failed your job as a designer, essentially. Right? Now, I could, take the same idea. I could take my square shape that I came up with, patent pending, trademark, right? And I can give it a different set of key shapes instead of like a beak and eyes and wings. I could give it like a barrel, right? I could give it like a handle, right? Something to hold on to. I can give it a trigger, right? It's going to look a lot more like a gun, right? There are things that are non-negotiable about the gun, right? There are things that are negotiable, right? Like this shape over here. That probably needs a hammer too, huh? That still looks like a gun. Right? When we design, we're mostly working within this space. Okay, so I want you guys to keep that in mind. This is actually a really good thing though, because it lets you be extremely creative, but still get the read down, right? When you look at these designs over here, there's a lot of creativity that goes into, figuring out the surfacing and figuring out the form on this car, right? This Corvette. There's a lot of creativity that goes into, it's like a little Chrysler or something. There's a lot of like creativity and there's a lot of like, things you can do to express yourself, right? And as long as you stick on the things that you're supposed to stick on, it'll pretty much read as what it's supposed to read as, right? Like these all read as vehicles that you can get inside and drive, even though they have a huge variety and a huge diversity in their shape language. So I want you guys to keep track of that. Okay. One thing that I want to talk about more in depth later when I'm doing my demo is this idea of muddiness, right? You guys all know what a muddy painting is. I went on ArtStation and I sorted by like latest submissions and I found this awful piece of shit. Right? We all know what a muddy painting is. It's when our values don't separate correctly. Look at that. Like, what is that garbage, right? Like, look at this shit. It's just like one giant mass of gray, and it's like the same gray over here. Most people are familiar with the concept of muddiness in paintings, right? It's when your contrast isn't organized well enough. And so your painting just looks like general shit, right? There can also be muddiness in design. Right? I haven't been keeping up with the chats. Gordon lectures 70% grateful, 30% insulting you. Well, you got to keep the memory, like it's a memory device, right? When you insult people, they tend to remember it. But here we go, right? I also like insulting people. But look at this, right? All of our details in this image about the same size, right? Some are bigger, some are smaller, but each piece kind of occupies the same amount of space. This one's definitely smaller, right? So there's kudos for that. Right? When we do this, we have muddiness in our design, right? We don't have that contrast we're looking for, right? Remember, it all comes back down to this, right? We need to have context and we need to have arrangements, right? We need to think about the big picture of what's going on. When you look at something like this, they're not really thinking big picture, right? All their shapes are kind of medium sized. There's no one shape that stands out as like a huge shape. There aren't really shapes that stand out as like teeny tiny shapes. They'll kind of come together. Just like over here, right? If we look at like this cliff, for example, there's no real light and shadow. It's all just kind of one big blob of dog shit, right? I'm going to be showing you guys some methods for avoiding muddiness within our designs later on. So make sure you keep that in mind. Yeah, so contrast and size, tone, design. Yeah, so contrast in general, right? Everything is contrast, right? Imagine if you're playing a song, right? And your song is just like this: dun, 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 dun. It's not very good of a song, right? If your painting or your design has that same energy, people aren't going to be very interested in it either. Right? So there's different ways you can generate contrast, of course, right? Like in music, you can have different instruments for different textures to the sound. You can have, of course, different pitches. You can play at different speeds, right? You get your half notes, you get your quarter notes, you get your full notes, whatever you need. And in art, it's the same way. There are different ways to generate contrast, right? Sometimes you actually don't want very much contrast, right? If you're playing if you're in a harmony section and you just want to repeat like one theme or motif over and over again, you can do that, right? The same things with art. You can repeat something over and over again. In fact, if you look at this image over here, 90% of this one is repetition, right? And then a little bit of it makes it interesting. That's contrast. Okay, so that's muddiness, right? You should fear muddiness. Like, I'm sure many of you have been trained to fear muddiness in your paintings because you've gone on the internet and people have shat on you for it, right? You should also fear muddiness in your design work. The same way you should fear like having bad value structure. Okay? The last thing that I want to sort of preface my demo with is that form and function, right? A lot of people kind of say like, oh, should I focus more on form or function or whatever? They're the exact same thing, right? I know that's not a very helpful way to define them. Obviously they're different in terms of like one's there to look pretty, the other's there to, for example, the wheels over here, right? But I want you to consider this, especially in entertainment, okay? Especially if you're doing something for like illustration or concept art, that form and function, like in practice, become very similar, right? For example, let's have a look at Darth Vader's helmet over here, right? What function does any of this have, really? Right? It's just a piece of plastic that they put on an actor's head, right? It doesn't actually keep like a dead guy alive inside. It doesn't have any function, right? It's purely form. You understand? Right? There are things that we can do to make it look functional. We can add in little like kit-bashed parts. We can put some nuts and bolts in there. We can have like all kinds of little things to make it look functional, but it's not, right? Actually, the real function of this design, right, is just to look scary, menacing, and functional, right? Make him look like a evil robot man, right? That's its function. And the form in this case expresses that function. Understand? Right. If we have a look at the opposite end of the spectrum over here, there's a little soy sauce bottle, right? Because on the server we all love soy. The function of this, ostensibly, is just to hold sauce and to pour it, right? And if that was all the function was, though, like there's no reason why you can't just use a teacup, right? Or why you can't use like an old shitty water bottle that you found on the side of the street that like some hobo piston, you washed it and you put soy sauce in it, right? Why do people like this soy sauce bottle in particular? Because it's pretty. That's it. Part of its function is to be pretty. when you have guests over, you don't want to have like your, hobo piss soy sauce bottle, and you don't want to serve that to them, right? You want other people to be like, hey, like I care enough about appearances and I care enough about you to make something or to have something beautiful here, right? That's part of its function, right? If that were not part of its function, then everybody would just be using piss bottles, right? So when you approach a design, like what's the actual application of this? Gordon, why are you saying this shit, right? What can I use? So it's the same things here, right? Like this is just a speaker. There's form. Part of its function is to look pretty, right? Part of its function is to be used. Part of its function is to be pretty, right? Part of its function is to be used. This is Porsche. Part of its function is to be useful. Part of its function is to look pretty, right? Um, in entertainment, it's mostly just to look pretty, right? But okay, so the real practical application of thinking this way is that when you approach a design, right, I want you guys to consider, right, exactly where on the spectrum you are, right, and exactly what the functionality of your design is, and I want you to factor aesthetics into that functionality, right? I want this design to look blank, right? I want this design, the function of this design is to scare my audience. The function of this, hot, furry anime waifu is to get the Coomers to fall in love with it. So they pay me, my Patreon bucks, right? The function of like X is Y, right? Like, why are you making the piece? Why are you making this design? Why are you creating this drawing, right? That all comes down into function. And a lot of people don't think about that, right? It's it's actually stunning to me that how many people don't think about that. They don't know what they're trying to create. They don't know why they're trying to create it, right? Because they're too down in the weeds. They're thinking like, oh, this shape goes here, this line goes here. But we need to elevate our thinking to a higher level if we want to be designers, right? So next time you're designing something, think about what the purpose or the impact of that design would be, right? In terms of entertainment, you are going to have zero practical use, right? So if you're designing like, I mean, it's like that's not true. Like you can like there are a lot of movie props that like can be used in real life and they do get manufactured, right? Um, maybe yeah, like usually with like merchandising tie-ins or whatever. Like they made like for the Matrix, they had like a flip phone, and then they like manufactured the phone in real life, and people bought it as like a collector's item. So there can be functionality, sure, right? But your primary function, if you're working within entertainment, is going to be to entertain and to make people feel something and to garner some kind of reaction. What that reaction is it's up to you or your art lead or your director or whoever, but that is something that you should be considering at all times when you design, right? Like, if they designed Darth Vader's helmet and they weren't aware of what the functionality was, that's supposed to be intimidating and scary, and they just made like a big like ooh woo face or whatever with like a little baby hair coming out of it and like blushing cheeks, right? This would not satisfy the function of a Darth Vader mask. Even if you say, well, what, like I'm gonna have like a little gas mask valve on it, so that's my functionality, bro. It's like it's keeping him alive. It's like no, 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 no. You don't fucking get it. The functionality is to scare your audience with a scary looking mask. Although this would be kind of terrifying in its own way. Yeah. So with all that out of the way, I'm gonna go ahead and just fire up a demo, and we'll talk a little bit more about all of these things. Um, uh, in real time as I work. So I have a few options here. I have like these shapes that I did. Since I did this one in front of you guys, I'm kind of inclined to use it, right? Because I sort of want you guys to see the purpose from beginning to end, or sorry, see the process from beginning to end. That said, though, I do like some of these shapes I made over here. You know what? I got the ball to do this. Let's do it. Right, let's just take this shape over here. And let's start separating this thing out and designing it, right? So in terms of its functionality, this does not work yet as concept art, right? like, first of all, we don't know what it is. What is it? Right? Right. We don't know how it's supposed to make us feel, right? What's its function. And there's just definitely not enough resolution, right? More res. Right? There's no detail on it yet, in other words. So how do we go about cramming detail onto this thing, right? Do we just make our details all muddy? Be like, you know what, this, 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 right? Looks like pure shit, doesn't it? Like you hate it. You go up to Blizzard or like Riot or whatever. You say, hire me. I've done some concept art. I got a lot of detail in it. Right? They're gonna laugh at you. They're gonna be like, what the hell is this? You know, what are people gonna see or what are people gonna think when they see something like this? Right? So we're not gonna be doing that. Instead, we're going to be looking for ways to organize our details. Hold on. I'm not gonna lie, a big hang up about shape design used to be mainly the actual ordering of it. In a way, it's saying that you're supposed to design shapes that would bring back the 2D element of the art. When everything else immerse yourself in the 3D. Yeah, like 3D shapes, man. There you go. Hang up, averted. Okay, so with that said, let's go ahead and start separating, right? One thing that I'm going to want to avoid is evenness, right? Once again, that leads to muddiness, and that's not what I want. This would be an even split. This would be an even split, right? Instead, what I might want to do is something like this, right? Maybe I split my stuff in a way that has some big, medium, and small in it, right? Maybe I can get another small piece over here, right? But the way I split should have some kind of contrast, right? The simplest would just be to split somewhere down the middle, like this. Maybe like, was it 30% on one side, 70% on the other, right? Or maybe 20% on one side, 80% on the other. I'm just going to start with that. So let's go ahead and do some of these splits. Maybe I can split one here. Should I go that way? Or should I go the other way? Okay. So even though my fundamentals are, kicking in at this point for the design, I still have a lot of decisions to make. The direction I split, the proportion I split in, I sort of like it the other way. I'll do this one. I'm going to do another split over here. Maybe this time I'll have it be on the top. And this time I'll just I'll chuck this one in the side. Okay. So there we go, right? We have a little bit of detail in here, and it seems to be well organized. In other words, it's not making my eyes bleed just yet, right? So that's pretty good. That deserves a little bit of a pat on the back. We've managed to cram some detail in there while keeping some sort of visual interest in, right? The next one that I want to talk about is a matter of practice, and that is just that when you have designs, right, and you change from one element or one piece to another, you typically have some kind of connector piece in between. Right, let me see if I can find an example or two of this. Perfect, right? Here we have a chair, right? And this is a Ray and Charles Eames lounge chair, right? Very famous chair from the middle of the century. We have some plywood on the bottom, we have some leather on the top, right? What happens in between the plywood and the leather? We see a seam, right? That's a connection detail, right? Or like a joining detail, right? Often when we have two things that are very different joined together, there is some kind of detail at the point at which they join together, right? Same thing over here. If we go from the plywood to this metal bracket, we have some bolts over here. We have kind of like a little, like a little seam, right? Between this, I don't know what you would call it, like girdle or like a support structure and the floor, right? We have this sort of pneumatic detail over here that lets us adjust, going up and down. Between the floor and the legs, right, we actually see some detail there as well in the form of these little semicircles, right? So we can find the same thing all over the place, right? Over here, right, we have seams, we have screws. Over here, we have a little bit of a lip, right, that lets us screw up the cap. right? Even on the bottom, there's some detail down here, right? We have like a little bit of some bumps or some kind of like, glass detailing. Okay. I probably don't have to explain too much from here, right? You can probably see it for yourself in this car, right? Look for two areas that are different from each other and look at what's in between, right? For example, you can look at the headlight and you can look at the car paint, right? And in between, you see quite a lot of detail, right? You can look in between the glass and the car paint as well. And you have like these rubber stoppers, you have, little metal bits of metal framing, so on and so forth. Okay. So that's what I'm going to do to my design as well, right? I'm just going to copy reality a little bit. And I'm going to look for some kind of joining details in between. Keep in mind that I still don't know what the hell I'm even drawing, right? And that's pretty important. Like you shouldn't, like in terms of just pure shape design, right? It doesn't actually matter what you're drawing almost. And these details that you draw, they don't have to be too fancy either, right? For example, here, all I'm drawing is like a little seam. And maybe I'll have like a little bit of like rubberized material over here. Right? Maybe I'll give it like, if I want to try hard, I can give it a little bit of a pop. Right? There we go. We can do the same thing over here between like this piece and this piece, right? Just give some kind of tolerance here. Maybe like, thinking back to that Kikkoman bottle, maybe I can have a little bit of a lip. Let's see. Yeah, I'll draw a little bit of a square lip, or like something that would attach them. Right? Maybe I'll draw some like bolts. Notice that right now, what I'm doing with the bolts is that I have transitioning details or like joining details for my joining details, right? So, for example, this rubber piece is joining this piece and this piece, and then these little bolts are joining my rubber piece along with this piece, right? So you can kind of fractalize this concept as far as you think is necessary. I'll have a little bit of a piece come up to receive that other chunk. Right. There we go. Cool. Okay. So are there any other joining details that I can push, right? Maybe like one over here. Okay. At this point, right, we have actually quite a lot of detail starting to work into this design, right? But once again, it doesn't look bad, right? It's not making my eyes bleed just yet. We're organizing this detail in a way that it makes sense and makes it easy to read. Okay. So over here, maybe like this 80-20 separation. I'm gonna have some kind of detail splitting this thing apart. Maybe it's just a seam for now. Maybe we can do the same thing over here. Maybe like instead of doing a seam this time, I'll have some kind of like bracketing. Okay. And generally you want to be a little bit more consistent. I'm just showing you guys a few different examples of like details that can put between it. This one is like starting to get a little bit like schizo with like the different types of different types of detailing I'm using. Maybe like I kind of like this bracketing though. Maybe I'll just move this forward a little bit. Maybe I'll use something like this back in here just to keep things consistent. So yeah, a handicap that I'm giving myself on purpose when I design this is I have no clue what it is. Right? I want you guys to keep that in mind. And I want you guys to, when you design something in like real life, you probably should know what it is, right? But I want you to know that like these principles like work within a vacuum. That's the reason I'm doing this, right? These principles work even if you don't even know what you're drawing. Right? It makes it look believable. I'm already getting like it looks like a robot leg. Like it's not a robot leg, but yeah, like it starts looking like something. You don't know what, but it's something, right? And that's what I mean. Okay. So one other common place for details is the new PlayStation. Yeah, God. PS5 was actually pretty ugly. So one other place where it's common to see details is towards the ends, right? I mean, you can actually just look at like you can probably like just get this from just looking at a pencil, right? Your standard like number two pencil that you used to shove up your nose when you were a kid. That's what you're an artist now. Uh, here we go. Like this. Right? You see detail in the functionality, right? And the functionality tends to gather at the ends of things, right? Or it tends to gather, when wherever you believe that humans would interface with it, right? If we take a look at some of these examples, right, this big cap is a pretty substantial detail, right? It happens at the top of this bottle because I mean, where else would you have a cap, right? Um, and that's at the end of the cap. That's where the spouts are, right? Which is pretty natural. If you look at this design over here, just looking at the turntable, right, you see quite a lot of detail, around where the needle is, where the function, uh, where the needle makes contact with the record. You're going to see some detail. Right? Same thing over here. We already talked about it. Towards the end, when this chair has to interact, there's some detail. Right? Same thing over here, where the car has to interact with the ground, where the car has to interact with what's in front of it, with the car when the car has to interact with what's behind it. There's some details. Right? If you notice, these details generally happen at the extremities. Right? It's not, of course, always true. Right? With design, you do have to take everything said with a grain of salt, right? But in general, right, this sort of functionality will happen where you believe things will interface, and things generally interface towards the ends, right? Not really in the middle as much, more pushed off to the side, perhaps. So let's add some detail towards the ends, right? Once again, no clue what this is, so I can't really push any specific details, but I'll just make up some noise, right? Just like bullshit. In other words. Here's a detail. What is it? No idea. There's another one. What is it? No clue. We can start adding some transition details in here, or what I call them, like join details. Right, join details. Maybe on this end over here, towards the top, we can have some kind of you know, big sort of important detail. I'll just draw a circle there. I have a few different layers of these circles to make it feel more important. I'm going to have some joiner details. This could be like a burner, it could be like a camera lens, who knows, right? It's just circles for now. So at this point, I feel like I've included more details than I did in the beginning, right? Um, so remember when I was doing this, right? Like this, and this, right? It wasn't actually that much detail, but the way that I handled it made it look ugly as fuck, right? The way that I'm handling these right now is, it's a little bit better. And so, uh, even though I have more detail right now, right, I'm organizing it in such a way that makes it look less ugly. Zehar, I'm not gonna redline shit for you, dude. I'm in the middle of a demo. You're setting yourself up to be rejected. So I might go ahead and do another material split over here. I really like this, right? These two feel too even right now. So I'm going to change my split, maybe into something like this instead. Actor details, there we go. Now we got something. I'm going to go ahead and put some detail towards the ends, this side as well. So I'm just going to do like the very basics. This is just like some trim. I want you guys to note that even though I'm talking about this stuff in the context of kind of like almost industrial design or, just like hard surface design, it does apply to most everything, right? If you're doing characters, then like managing your contrast is very important. If you're doing illustration even, right? Then, well, you definitely don't want to end up with a muddy painting. I'm going to do the same thing over here. You guys should be pretty well aware of like what I'm trying to do and why. There we go. Let's do a split over here for some trim. Okay. And finally, let's go ahead and add some kind of, like functionality detail on this end as well. Just gonna put something here. I don't want to put it smack dab in the middle because once again, I'm still managing my contrasts. That said, it's not strictly wrong to do so. Visual library maxing comes in handy for this. Yeah, I would say so. I mean, I don't think I've like drawn anything that is too dependent on reference though. Like mostly I've drawn simple shapes, right? I think this piece might be the most, but I'm still working off of just like shape design for the most part. Like I'm drawing squares mostly for my detail, with the exception of this one. And I'm just trying to draw squares that are big, medium, and small, right? So there's nothing really, you're not wrong. It is definitely helpful to have a lot of visual library in here, but I would say that what I'm doing is not like strictly dependent on visual library, right? I'm still operating off of the principles that we were talking about. Want to do some smaller splits on this thing. So essentially it's like the same rules, but now I'm applying it on a smaller scale, right? When I'm doing these like splits into big, medium, and small. In this case, it's just big and then two small pieces, right? We're splitting it up. And it's one of those things where if you want to go down the rabbit hole and like continue detailing forever, like ad infinitum, you can. I'm not going to. I'm just going to leave it out here. Maybe I'll do a little bit. Maybe I'll like throw a little some like additional functionality detail over here, or like some kind of capping detail over here, right? There we go. There's your slot for your CD for the PS6. Okay. Let's see. What else can I add, right? There could be like maybe more of a joint on this side as well. That'd be nice. Maybe some kind of insinuation of a joint over here. I'm just getting lazy at this point, silhouetting it. Okay. Look at that. We actually have quite a lot of detail in this, but you can't really tell. Right? I mean, you can tell, but like it doesn't feel like too much. Like because we organized it very well, it doesn't feel like we're over detailed. Okay. Let's this piece over here feels a little bit boring. But I want to be careful about it, right? Because this right now is a big open space, and I sort of want to preserve that, right? Once again, if I cut up every piece of my design into smaller pieces, eventually it's just going to get muddy, right? So I need to preserve some big open spaces for my viewers' eyes to graze before going back into like the more detailed parts. So I just want to be careful about that. If I do any detail over here, I'm going to push it off to the side so I can preserve the majority of like my open space. Maybe maybe something like this. I like that because this and this feel visually similar in size. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to close off this and I'm going to push this off to one side, right? That way this part becomes bigger. You need to push that farther and draw it in correct perspective. Okay. Now you can keep on doing this. Like, you gotta believe me here. If I wanted to, I can just like keep adding detail to this for a long, long time, right? There's nowhere near we're nowhere near the limit of how much detail you can add. Right? But for the sake of since I've been already talking for an hour, um, I kind of want to get a move on with the next part of this demo, and that is to go ahead and add back in key shapes, right? I guess one thing I sort of want to do is I want to like add a little bit of texture to this somehow. So maybe yeah, maybe like I just do something here. Or maybe I like just put some like studs here or something. Let's see. Yes, right here as well. Get some of these smaller shapes in. Cool. All right. So now we have like a little bit of bumpiness to it. Love it. Maybe a little bit of something here as well. Sorry, guys. It's actually a lot of fun to do stuff like this. It's just like relaxing. Um, because it's just a good feeling of knowing that whatever you draw, it's going to come out okay because you're following along with the fundamentals, right? It won't be anything groundbreaking, that's for sure, but it's also not going to look ugly. There we go. So now I have my design. No idea what it is, but it's there. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to see if I can add some key shapes to this thing and make it look like a few different things. Right? Let's go ahead and do 3 of them. Okay. So for the first one, I kind of just want to make it into a spaceship, right? So let's think about what kind of things. I probably shouldn't merge these. I should probably just leave them out one by one. So first, I'm going to like go ahead and see if I can find an angle that makes it look more like a spaceship than other angles, right? Maybe this would work pretty well. So the other perspective kind of feels off. I think I fucked it up. Good enough. Right? So, what can we do to make this thing feel more like a spaceship, right? Well, that comes down to our key shapes. It's because this is like misaligned. There we go. So that comes down to our key shapes, right? What sort of key shapes would we need in a spaceship, right? Well, we need some kind of cockpit. Yeah, engines, wings, docking bays, windows, exactly, right? So let's start with a few of those. Let's start with like a few flaps. This seems like a good opportunity to have some kind of flap. Maybe it's got like even a solar panel or something on it. If we want to be, part of the green revolution. Uh, whatever. Let's just get a flap in there. Um, here we go. Let's add another one over here. And my rules that I designed with up to now still apply. So I can do like my material splits, I can do whatever I want. Let's make this thing into like a big ass stocking bay. I'm gonna take this and cut it in half, move it out, just kind of continue it this way. Maybe I would have like some kind of sensor arrays. So maybe like a few of these antenna, maybe another like wing flap over on this side. Maybe this whole thing over here can become more of like a cockpit or some kind of like observation bay. Maybe like a bridge would be here. Well, it would be a pretty shitty place for a bridge. Yeah. Okay, here we go. Maybe this is a transport vessel because it's got a weird shape to it, you know? Maybe that's the only thing that would make sense. Put some stripes on it. So maybe it's got like these big ass clamps. And then maybe it's got like some shipping containers down here. So this is like the thing that goes around and maybe it like grabs one of these shipping containers and it just sort of chucks it onto the bigger spaceship that actually takes care of it. Who knows? Prepares it for long-term flight. So I'm just going to go ahead and start drawing functionality. Here's some kind of attachment point for it. Big, medium, and small, right? So I want to draw like a small piece of pipe, like a big one, and then since I'm just kind of riffing off of my shape language, I'm going to add a few more of those. I'm missing a flap over here. So let's go ahead and put that on. Not going to draw up the details, but whatever. Finally, I'm going to have some kind of engine. So I want some kind of thruster, maybe on this side. You know what? Yeah, maybe like over here as well. I can have like another one of these side fins. This is where knowing a little bit of perspective comes in handy, even though my perspective isn't perfect right now, because I don't want you guys to sit through me doing like, you know, hardcore anal perspective construction. You know, just knowing like a little bit to be able to eyeball it well enough, it's usually enough. Okay. Go ahead and draw those thrusters now. It's a little bit too big, right? It feels like it's competing with like the spin in terms of its sizing. So I'm going to shrink it a bit. Maybe add like a few more lumen. One on this side. Here's my shipping container. Go ahead and put a lock there. I'm going to put my lock not 50-50, but I'm going to put it slightly off to the side. I'm going to have some kind of attachment detail over here. There's my shape, my spaceship design. Okay. So I'm going to use the same shape to do something else now. I made a few copies of this. So this time, let's do some piece of architecture. I already kind of like what's going on in this current orientation for architecture, so I'm going to keep it. But let's think about what we need for architecture, right? Maybe one thing that we'll need is some kind of like door or some kind of like deck or some kind of like rooftop terrace, right? So we can start drawing things that we expect to see out of architecture. Hopefully the point I'm trying to make is getting across. The point being that, you know, everything that you design comes back down to shapes, right? And your shape language and your management details and all these like basic principles. In fact, when I taught this class at the university, is symmetry something that should be avoided? Well, for some things you need symmetry, right? If you're doing like a car or if you're doing a character, you absolutely do need symmetry. I'm not using symmetry here because once again, I wasn't aware of what I was designing before I designed it. But there's nothing wrong with symmetry. Okay? And I'll show you an example of like, good shape design with symmetry. We were actually just looking at them. I was going to go back and look at those cars, but we'll do that in a second. So there's a little rooftop terrace. Maybe we can get one of those like, no fly towers where it's like, lights up at the tip. Um, there'd be maybe like a midway, like balcony that people can come out of over here. Go ahead and draw the railings for the balcony. Go ahead and draw our door. I'm going to keep the same shape language for our door as with the rest of the image. Let's draw like a little gallery of windows over here, perhaps. Maybe this whole thing over here is some kind of elevated platform for the entranceway, and it sits on its own scaffolding. So I'm going to see if I can draw the scaffold. I want to like make a shape that's pretty interesting for it. I don't want to just like do like square. I mean, I could do square. Yeah, you know what? It'll work. I want to see if I can do something else. Maybe I'll just do a trapezoid, just to make it flow with this sort of like futuristic building thing a little bit. And maybe like has like these triangle beams. Okay, so at this point, I'm just thinking of key shape, but I'm still kind of giving a little bit of consideration back to my shape design. Okay, here we go. And then maybe over here, we can have like the main entrance. Okay, so we would have like this door over here, but it seems a little bit weird to have like a door just on its side like this. So I'm going to go ahead and, in case it rains or something, we're going to cover it up. There's my kind of like entranceway. Little acceptance detail over there, right? A little bit of a joint. And then over here, we can have like the bridge that comes into it. There we go. Last thing is, maybe we can decorate it with some other things that would help tell the story. So maybe like some trees in the area, right, just to give it a scale of the building. Maybe like some bushes down here. And now we have a spaceship and we have a piece of architecture. I was going to do one more, but I'm not sure. Probably the easiest would just be to do a car, right? So let's try to make this into some kind of land vehicle as well. This is the last one. I'm going to choose an angle that I feel like would be good for making this into a land vehicle. It doesn't even matter. Like maybe I'll just make it into some kind of like draw. I did mess up the perspective over here a little bit, so I'm going to see if I can correct it. Yeah. This yeah, the perspective on this is pretty terrible. It's definitely just poorly eyeball perspective. If I really cared about this as like a design, if it was like client work or something, or if I was at a studio, I'd probably have used the grid or just use like a 3D block in, right? Okay, so let's see if we can make this into some kind of land vehicle, right? So like we discussed before, all it really needs, and this is where like a reference, by the way, really does come helpful, right? I mean, like even something like this building, there's like more that we could have done to like make this feel more like a building, like, you know, we could have had like street lamps or something. Those are the things that I think really come from reference well, right? Little key shapes like this, very useful. When you use reference, just make sure that you know what your reference is for, please, right? For example, if you're referencing something and you like its big shapes, you just like, you know, a certain form on it, then reference it for its form, right? If you are at the point where you're looking for key shapes because you already have your form semi-developed, you just want to make it look more like a building, then yeah, like look for these little key shapes, you know, lamps, you know, maybe a little trash can in the corner over here. Maybe like, you know, if it's a helipad, it's gonna have like this, you know, big ass H on it, right? Little things like that will help you kind of like solidify and cement your read on your designs. All right, so finally, let's go ahead and do this car, right? So I'll be the first to admit I'm not too much of a car guy. My friends are generally much more knowledgeable. Right, it's kind of hard to avoid. Go to a place like Art Center to not get at least like somewhat into cars because, you know, a lot of car people there, big car culture at school. I had one classmate who didn't even have an apartment when he was going to school. He just rented out garage space and then he used the rent money that his parents were giving him to buy more cars. He's dedicated. He just slept in the van that he had. Plenty of car guys. There are plenty of actually not too many gun guys because it's still California after all. But a lot of like watch people as well. Right. That was like one thing that I picked up was like I kind of became a watch guy for a while, which it's not worth it. I mean, it's cool, right? There's like a lot of really awesome looking watches out there, but uh, you know, you can sink a lot of money into that shit. Can I flash my ice? Yeah, sure. So what I'm wearing right now is a wristwatch check, I guess, is a Omega Seamaster from I think this is a 1968 or 1971. I forget which one this is. But it's a nice one, right? Automatic movement, keeps time pretty well, even after 50 years. And I got it for a really good bargain. It only cost me about 700, and the the restoration cost. You know, I took it to a watch shop, and the cost for like a full cleaning and setting and all of that was only about another 200 on top of that. But it is a pretty expensive hobby. You know, it's like that's another roughly $1,000 I could have if I just you know, if I was just okay with telling the time by looking at my screen, or looking at my phone, which you know it doesn't actually give you much, right? It's more of just like it's more of just a conversation starter for when I meet other watch people. So it's like a lot of other designers are like watch people, um, and you know it's a nice like little you know thing you can do to just you know start conversations. Like recently when I was in LA, I I met this guy who was working on like fucking Rick and Morty of all things, and he was super into my watch because there was like it was a watch that he wanted for himself, and we just talked about watches for a bit. He's gonna say he's like if you want a job here, man, I'll put in a good word for you, and I was just like, no, I don't. I do not want to work. But yeah, it's cool. there's like a whole language that these people speak, and it helps to like be kind of into it, right? If you're into cars, like even if your art isn't like the best in the world, if you're into cars, people are going to want to be around you because they want to talk about cars, you know? So it's like it's stuff like that. I have a friend who became good friends with John Park just because he owns a Porsche, and John loves that shit. So they were just like bond over it. Yeah, it's a very materialistic city, that's for sure. Um, it's Los Angeles. What do you expect, right? Expecting people to be, simple, living close to the earth. No, right? Fucking like idiot. Like, that's how it happens in LA. So I kind of drew one of these tires, and I'm sick of drawing them, so I'm just gonna copy paste it. Hold on, let me just set this thing correctly. Maybe I'll have this cat part come up. I was thinking of getting another Omega, but it's like $4,000 is the next one that I want. Can't justify that one. Much as I liked it. It was like I was literally like earlier today, I was like hovering my hand over the buy button. And I was like, I want it. But no, irresponsible. Do that again. So there's my tires. Let's go in, erasing them out. This thing is kind of stupid right now. So I kind of want to make it into like one of those drop down sort of like cabins that you see on like construction machinery. So I'm just going to modify it with once again key shape. Right? And this is where a reference once again like Visual Library can come in real handy. Okay. So that could be my cabin. We can have like some, if it's going to be like a car, we can add in all kinds of things to make it feel more like some kind of vehicle. It's a very strange vehicle to be sure, but whatever. Look what I'm working with here. Miracle worker. Yeah, maybe like some extra like battery lights over here. And I'm getting kind of sick of this drawing, so I'm gonna probably end it without like going too far on the details from here. Just like a few things, like a ladder would be nice, to help tell the scale. Here's a ladder. Here's like a little hatch that you can use to get in. It's a little bit centered, kind of like violating my rules here. There we go. And then maybe like whoever like works here could like make their way up to the top eventually, climbing around inside, or maybe there's like some scaffolding around that I'm going to be too lazy to draw. Let's elevate these back tires a little bit. I feel like they're quite in perspective. So yeah, the perspective in this one is weird. It's like you're looking up at it, right? Uh, yeah, it should still be higher up. Let's say Photoshop. There we go. Yeah, that's feeling a little better. Okay. Let's see. Star Wars design, yeah, kind of, right? Kind of got that energy going on. I want to like make a little bit of a walkway over here. You know those like big ass construction machines, right? Wow. They have like these crazy walkways all over the place. They got huge tires. I don't know what this one would do. Maybe it like hold something really high up, right? But I mean, whatever. I don't have any story for this. I don't really have any like design brief. So I can't really do much if I don't have that. I can make something up on the spot, sure. Maybe it holds like a giant, here's your mother's dildo, right? There, right? Um, but I mean, we don't really know. Just a few key things that make your brain say car, vehicle, gun. Yeah, exactly. So that's the point I wanted to make here. Right. So we talked about some design principles. We talked about how to organize details. We talked about like making your details not muddy. And at the last stage, we applied some key shapes, right? This one looks like some kind of spaceship. This one looks like some kind of building. And this one looks like some kind of car, even though they all started from the exact same spot, right? So yeah, so what I want you guys to do now is to, so the lecture and the demo portion of this are done. I'm not really going to talk about color. It's too much, right? I think we did enough here. Um, so what I want you guys to do is, sorry. So what I'm trying to say is that's the end of the demo, right? We got some designs out. We're real concept artists now. Go work for Apex Legends, gonna work for Fortnite, whatever. Go work in the video game industry, right? So what I want you guys to do now is, if you want to stick around for the assignment, is to just put some shapes together like this, right? Exactly like this. Um, find like a shape that you want or a form that you like. It could be something as simple as the humble cube, right? And in fact, I've done this exact demo in the past with a cube, right? Because generally speaking, the students that I had in that class, the academy, were pretty weak. So I didn't trust them to draw like more complicated constructions like this right off the bat. So I just started with a cube, right? And start arranging your cube in terms of big, medium, and small. If that's too difficult for you because you're just a beginner or because you have a very low IQ, that's fine. You can still be a concept artist, but instead of drawing a cube from the beginning, um, you can just start with some flat squares, right? So we can just start with something like this. Right? And there we have some big, medium, and small. Right? And once you have this figured out, you can draw that in 3D, right? Generally speaking, if you're an idiot, you can still pretty much do what all the smart kids do. It just takes a few extra steps for you, right? Because you can't solve, you're the guy in algebra class who can't do the mental math and actually needed to write down all the steps, right? Not the guy who wrote down the steps because your teacher wanted. That's fine. As long as you have the right answer at the end, it doesn't really matter. And that's a big moment, right? It's like if you actually do need to take extra steps, there's no shame in it. Here's my small cube. Right? And then I have another one over here. So I'm just going to draw that coming out the side. It looks like it's coming out of the front, and then it ends about halfway. This is about halfway, I think. Right? So let's go ahead and draw that. I want to make it a little bit higher as well. Yeah, if even this is too much for you, like what I'm doing right now, because you are, if you're really just starting out, or if you're really really dumb, um, then just stick to the 2D as well, right? This is like easy mode. This is a smart mode, right? See, I'm making all the jokes now that I wish I could make when I was teaching this at the university. This is nice. This is nice. All right. So there we go. Let's do a few like this. Let's go ahead and just to get some practice out, do like maybe between 3 and 5 of them. Let's go until about maybe shit. You know, I just realized like doing this entire process for you guys would probably take a little bit longer than it took for me. So this might be better just as like given as homework, right? But let's give you guys maybe like 25 minutes. We'll meet at 8 p.m. Pacific time to look at all of your cube arrangements. If you don't feel like doing it, then you're welcome to still hang around and laugh at everybody else's. But then people will know, right? They'll know that you didn't submit any, and they'll talk. We'll know. All right. So you might as well submit yours as well. All right. Let's go ahead and take a bit of a break. Come back at 8 o'clock. Draw some cubes. Or jerk off. Eat some dinner. Go talk to your own mother. But be back by 8 and go ahead and post your stuff as soon as you're done with it into the what is it? The is there like a channel for this workshop channel? I think, right? Yeah. And yeah, let's get some big, medium, and small in there. If you want to do multiple mediums, multiple smalls, then that's fine too. But I would recommend that you have at least, you have just like one big shape, right? Don't do more than one big shape. That's going to be a mistake. All right. Are there any questions? Oh, Wes is streaming. Shit, have you been following along, Wes? Oh, damn. There we go, man.
Oh, they're on to it. Fuck.
Good shit, dude. Good fucking shit, man. All right. If you have any feedback for me, please, let me know. If it's negative feedback, then you can go fuck yourself. Only give. No,
That was awesome.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you.
Glad I finally saw the end of the shape lesson. The real shape lesson.
Real shape lesson. No, but if there is any feedback, like negative or otherwise, I'd be happy to hear it.
Mm.
Cool.
Yeah, this is enlightening. Thank you.
Yeah. Let's see. Yeah, okay. All the praise is coming in. Great, fantastic. Just like I wanted. Like, I really do this for. Okay. Okay, I'm gonna turn my camera off. And should we even do this in class? Do you guys even want feedback on shit like this? Maybe like just do it on your own time and like fucking post it into, because I feel like we've gone long enough already, right? Like when did we start this thing? 6? It's been like an hour and a half. It's a long time for me to talk just by myself. So maybe we just like as you finish these up, go ahead and post them on the workshop channel.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, and then yeah, start with the shapes. If you want to go into details, if you want to challenge yourself, stop you, right? Yeah, don't ever listen to your teachers, right? Don't ever fucking stop just because your teacher told you to stop. Like if you're in art school right now, that's the advice I'm giving you. Don't listen to these guys, right? They don't know what the fuck they're talking about most of the time as it pertains to you, right? For example, all I've done today is I've told you guys how to be more like me, right? If that's something you're interested in, then yeah, listen to it, right? If you want to do like hard surface design or like whatever, if you want to be like more, design conscious, if you want to make your work look more like the art center look, right? Then it makes sense. If your ambition is to draw lolly hentai, then none of this is basically useful for you, right? And if that's what you want to do, I guess more power to you or whatever. But don't take my advice to go and draw your lolly hentai, right? Take what's useful maybe, but don't make that decision for yourself. Make that determination for yourself, right? Some things that like teachers or like workshop teachers or whatever the fuck I am, something that like all teachers will do is they'll none of them fully pertain to you. You're a unique and special snowflake who loves little girls um, and eating their shit or whatever your particular fetish is. Maybe it's like cum flating little girls. Um, but uh, but yeah, make think for yourself, right? If you can't think for yourself, don't fucking be an artist. Okay? If you can't think for yourself, don't be a fucking designer. What the fuck are you doing? You don't want to think for yourself, go fucking like stock shelves at Walmart. Okay? If you do want to think for yourself, then then you're in the right place. Can I post my examples somewhere? Sure. Yeah. I'll just throw them up in a. Do you not understand how high my pay is? Yeah. All the people after listening to this.
Yo, thank you for the workshop.
Yeah.
My brain is like exploding right now.
Yeah. Sorry to load it in all at once. It's supposed to be like a week class that kind of crammed into an hour and a half. So you might want to go back to the recording and have a look at it again. You might want to revisit the slides at some point. But I genuinely believe that what I told or what I'm talking about is it does have like broad application. You just have to figure out like what parts of it apply and what parts don't. And I also believe that's relatively simple at the end of the day. Like once you get it, once you once you understand like how this perception stuff works and how to control it and how to control your contrasts, then it's really not like rocket science. But just gonna upload all my slides. Yeah. So here's a few houses that you might notice was done with this kind of thinking in mind, right? These were some sketches I was doing for just like my own pleasure, essentially, yesterday, and I realized like, hey, I'm kind of using some of these principles as well, right? So not quite exactly because I am integrating some cultural elements and some reference that doesn't quite behave in the way that you would expect the shapes to behave. But generally speaking, it's like big, medium, small. It's consistent shape language. Imagine contrasts. Okay.
You always
Anything else I gotta do before we fuck off?
I like the lesson condensed so much. Like, if that was like a full week, I feel like I wouldn't have gotten as much out of it because it would have been like.
Yeah. Well, the
Too
whole
little.
thing about college is that they do try to jip you and they like try to like leave breadcrumbs for you, right? Because if they just tell you this stuff up front, this is a problem that Artsum used to have. Like they used to when Scott started the program, he would like tell everybody this shit up front, and then people would just get jobs and leave. So like nobody would graduate. So like what they do now is they like have the system where they like kind of like sprinkle it out to you and like kind of like keep you on the lead for about 4 years.
They give you breadcrumbs.
Yeah, they spread it out over 4 years so that you have to pay them the maximum amount, right?
True. Makes sense.
Isn't that what you did? You went in for like 2
Productivity.
years and you got a job, and then you left.
Yeah. Well, I asked my my upperclassmen, and they like told me, and I was like, oh, okay, cool. so I figured a way out around it. But yeah. All right. Well, if there are no more questions, that will conclude the workshop. Thanks for coming by. Think for yourself. Don't be a fucking sheep, and you'll be okay.
No.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, Olsen, do you want to go to voice chat for a bit?
Bye.